Let's start. Welcome everyone to Sitecore User Group India session. Today we have Hardeep Pamra with us. He has been working on DevOps practices and building infrastructure for the past 2 decades, and currently he works as DevOps practice lead at Horizontal Digital. And today he will be presenting on Sitecore XP Single on Azure Kubernetes. And this session will mainly focus on architecture review and a demo. So I would like to announce that with this session, we are starting Sitecore DevOps series, which will mainly focus on cloud engineering and CI/CD pipeline for Sitecore. So, and this is the first session of this series presented by Hardeep Bamra. So, Hardeep, over to you.
Thank you, Kushbu. Can you let me share the screen?
Sure.
I hope everybody can see my screen.
Yes, we can see your screen.
You see the presentation?
Yes, I can see the presentation.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining in. 7 I wouldn't have expected, honestly. I would have been happy with one participant also, so I appreciate your time this morning. Thank you for joining. So let's begin. Okay, so this is a series, as Kushbu mentioned, we are going to be doing it for cloud engineering, build and release, and the managed services too. From an cloud engineering point of view, we are going to be mostly connecting and talking about the way to build the infrastructure, the Sitecore infrastructure, primarily focusing on microservices and the platform as a services. At some stage, we are going to covering the Sitecore as well as the commerce practices, both for the Sitecore and the commerce side. Build and release is mostly going to be from an CI/CD pipeline, and at some stage, I will bring in the managed services to talk about the best way to troubleshoot, to find out the issues on cloud platforms. We are not going to be limiting ourselves to just doing it on the Azure. As in we keep on making the progress, we will also keep on doing it for the other cloud platforms too. That includes AWS and maybe in the later part of the year on the Google platforms. But to begin with, we are going to be focusing first on the cloud engineering part, and then slowly and gradually we'll keep on moving in the other directions. So the topic for the day is Sitecore XP Single on AKS, which is Azure Kubernetes Services. That's me, setting infrastructure for about 20 years, doing Sitecore for about 10 years, focusing mostly on DevOps practice globally within Horizontal. And that's my email ID. If you ever wish to get in touch with me, if you have any questions, please feel free to send email and write it to me. I'll be more than happy to answer. Here's the agenda. We will talk about the Azure Kubernetes Services. We will review the XP Single architectural diagram. We'll look into some of the AKS scripts with AZCLI being used in the backend. We'll also look into the Sitecore XP Single manifest files, .yaml files, and then we'll do a quick demo, and then we'll have a Q&A answer sessions. So generally what happens is that when you go and work into the newer platforms like AKS and microservices, you'll have a lot of questions. I'll try to provide the input and the insight as much as possible. But like I said, we are going to be having many more sessions in the future, and hopefully slowly and gradually we'll be able to answer some of your questions. So Azure Kubernetes as services. Now we know that when we talk about Azure Kubernetes as a services, basically we talk about two things. One is the control plane, and another is the worker node, which we call as a master one, and the other one is going to be in the worker node. So control plane is in case of the Azure Kubernetes services, control plane is a managed Azure resource, which means that all the management that needs to be done for the making sure the components that's related to control plane, for example, the Kube API server, the HCD server, the scheduler, the control managers, that's all going to be taken care by Azure. You just have to pay for the VMs that you're being using. Otherwise, everything else is their responsibility, which is why people would prefer to go on to manage Kubernetes, whether it is being done on the Azure side or whether it is being done on the AWS side or on the GCP. That's the benefit of it. That's a benefit of going on to cloud platform and using something like AKS. Now, a control plane, which is the master node, which is the brain, and everything that's been done on control through is being done through the master plane, has got some components which we'll need to touch upon at a very brief level. The first one is going to be the Cube API servers. The API server allows communication for management tool like kubectl or kube control or kubectl, however you would like to pronounce it, which we will see, which looks like something like this. So for example, if I say kubectl get pods, right, and you will see there's no pod for now. Okay. Now this kubectl is a client that's running on my system and it is interacting with the API server. Similarly, there's the HCD server, which is a key value store within the Kubernetes that maintains a lot of information about the nodes and the pods uh, in a key value pair. Similarly, we have kube schedule defines what node should run in the workload, which means if you got multiple workloads, what you would want to do is that you want the Kubernetes to be smart enough to understand which node is less occupied compared to the other one, right? That decision is being made by the scheduler. The actual work is done by the kubelet, which resides on the nodes and creates the pods. But the scheduler is the one responsible for sending the pods and the request to the kubelets. Similarly, the control manager, it oversees the controller that handles node operations and application of pods. Um, that's a high level view of the components that we would see. Um, as we know, the containers runs inside the pods in the Kubernetes world. The pods basically refers to a different wrapper because they are not being limited to only work with container. You can use container when I say it's not being limited to work with just Docker. They can work with some of the other container technologies too. So it's an unified platform, and pods is the wrapper that's being used to work with the container. Okay, so that's a very brief introduction about the Kubernetes services. This is how the Azure managed and customer managed kind of a scenario would look like. This has been picked up from the Microsoft documentation itself. There you have a control plane. This is the one that's responsible. The API server is where you interact with. Then you have scheduler that's going to work with the node, as you can see in the backend. And it's going to let the handover or provide the instructions to the kubelet. The kubelet is the one that's going to run the container runtime and create the containers. The kube proxy is being used mostly for internal containers in the pods communication point of view. Then you have control manager, which is again controlled by the API server. The instructions are provided by the API servers to make sure that we are replicating the containers that's being controlled from here. So at a very high level, this is how the Azure Kubernetes services architecture looks like. We are going to be seeing some of the scripts, very simple scripts that I've used to deploy the AKS. We'll touch upon it in a very brief manner. I will try to provide you some of the insights. And then from there on, we'll also look into the architecture. Okay. Okay. Can you see my screen? Can you see the Visual Studio Code?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Awesome. So before I do that, let me show you that we already have a cluster up and running. Just the cluster, okay? I'm not referring to the pods. I had to get the cluster up and running because I had to make sure that the background work is being already done. If I start setting up the cluster during this session, it's probably going to go over an hour and a half or maybe a couple of hours. By the time we are set up with the cluster, we have deployed the pods, and we have an XP Single up and running. So I had to do some background, and that's the reason I have the pod cluster up and running. But in the future state, we'd also make sure that we have a session on how to set up the clusters separately. When you set up clusters, there are two things that happens. One, you get the cluster, which is as the Kubernetes services. You logged into it, and you'll see the node pools. Okay, the node pool, which is the system node pool, which is the control plane, and a user node pool. You don't really need a Windows for a system because Kubernetes can probably can function on the Linux, but then it can probably function better than how it would do it on a Windows environment. So we have used a Linux operating system for a control plane and a Windows operating system for the Sitecore XP Single. So I already have a cluster up and running. The cluster will show you the version that we're using, which is 1.19.6. We are using the Azure networking. We're not using the default, the basic one. We have defined the node size that we want to use with in the future stage. When you do the demo, you'll also see how we scale up, how we scale down, and a lot of other steps. We have defined the CIDR notifications, we have DNS IPs, the bridge that you would need, and a lot of other steps. Now, when I refer to this technologies or this terminologies rather, the subnet, when we talk about the subnet, uh, if I go back and if you see I've created a VNet virtual network here, and that virtual network will have a subnet also defined, a subnet for the nodes and a subnet for an app gateway, which we'll cover in a minute. Okay. But talking about the cluster, there are a few things that you have to understand. One is the subnet. The importance of subnet is the subnet we are going to use is within the virtual network where you want to deploy the cluster. That's the purpose. Then you have the service sider. Okay, the service sider address range that it's being called is a set of virtual IPs that Kubernetes assigns to the internal services. Kubernetes, if you have the understanding about it, apart from some of the components that I've shown it to you, one of the component is the services being created. Now, when you create a service, you would need a virtual IP that gets associated with the service, right? So that's a reason. Then you see another thing which is called as the Docker bridge sider. Okay? Docker bridge is network address represents the default Docker zero bridge network address. Okay, in all the Docker installations. So if you have been playing around with Docker on your local laptop or desktops as a developer, as a DevOps engineer, you would know there's an bridge network that gets created in a local environment that's called as Docker Zero. So while Docker Zero bridge is not used by the AKS cluster or the pods themselves, you must set this address to continue support scenarios such as Docker build within the AKS cluster. So that's the significance of it. Okay. So a very brief overview about the broad clusters. Let me focus back on how we really set it up. Okay, pretty simple. The first thing that we do is create the resource group. Nothing, highly technical here. We use easy CLIs. That's what mostly I have been using. Much easier for me, but there are different methods also. You can use ARM templates. You can use Terraforms. But for this demo purpose, I wanted to keep it very simple and straightforward. So Azure create locations, provide the name of the resource group and tags. Tags is not important, but kind of I have a policy defined, so I have to use tags. The second thing that we do is we create the virtual network. Okay, again, resource group defined and the address prefix defined. You don't really have to do that. I did it because I wanted to have a custom virtual network defined. I did not want to go ahead with the default when whatever Kubernetes provides. So I think we have somebody waiting, Kushbu. Let me address
Yes, yes, I allowed him to
Okay.
join the meeting.
Okay, so obviously when you have created the virtual network, you would also want to go ahead and set up the subnet. So that's what we have done here. We have set up the virtual network subnet using the resource group.
Hardip,
Yep.
yeah, there is a request from someone that can you zoom it like it's not
Yeah, yeah.
visible
Sure.
clear.
Sure, sure. Is it good enough now?
Yeah. Yes. Good.
All right. Okay. So we talked about the virtual network. Then we moved on to the subnet part. Okay, and the subnet part is where you're creating the subnet within the virtual network because I wanted to define my own subnet. I do not want to go ahead with the default that Kubernetes provides you. There are many reasons why you would not want to go ahead with the default one because even though if you're doing it on an XP single, mostly is being used in the development environment, but there is all probability that you might have an hybrid connection. You would want to go back and connect your clusters back on something which is available on premises and many more reasons to it. So it's nice to know and to do it in a customized way. Okay. So simple three things. You set up the resource group, you set up the virtual network, you set up the subnet here, and you straight away move on to setting up the cluster. Okay. And there are a few things. You don't really need to have as much stuff that I've defined here. There are a few mandatory things, like for example, the Kubernetes version, the location, but not everything here is mandatory. But like I've been saying, I wanted to customize it, and that's the reason you'll see many options defined here. I could have very well set them into all variables. Not have an hard-coded setting, something like here when you are providing the subnet ID, but I wanted to do it this way so that you understand it better and you have much more clarity. The whole intention is to let people know in the most easiest manner possible, right? So we start with AZ AKS create. We provide the cluster name. Okay, we provide the count. In a production environment, you would probably want to have 3 at least defined. That's the standard that AKS or Azure recommends. You will provide the VM size, the resource group where you want to set it up, the name of the cluster. In my case, just duplicate it twice, so don't mind. I'm going to be adding for the Windows nodes, I'm going to be adding some username and passwords. I want to set up the VM scale set type, which is, we know that Azure Kubernetes is not like a platform as a service. It's basically, you have the virtual machines running in the backend, and you're deploying the Kubernetes on top of it. So we want it to be on a VM scale set type, because you do not want your virtual machines to be down. And when you do it on a VM scale set type, you have the option of doing it in different availability zones for high redundancy. Okay? So that's the reason this is important to set, not mandatory, but you should always set this. Network plugin, again, not mandatory, but I prefer to do it with Azure so that I have more control on what I'm defining instead of just going ahead with the default that is available. Location, the Kubernetes version is needed. This is not the latest one, but this is the one that I've been playing around with. Attach ACR. Now you certainly have the flexibility of going and pulling the images from the Sitecore ACR. ACR basically means the container registry. Whether you're using an Azure container registry or Docker container registry, but basically means an ACR, container registry. I have my own container registry created for the Sugin demo because we'll be doing a lot more demos. Okay, so I've created my own. And since it is going to be within the Azure, it's going to be much easier to quickly. Now, the interesting part starts from here. When you will see the architectural diagram, you probably see the application gateway also defined there and created. There are 2 methods. You can create an application gateway. You can create the application gateway and integrate with the Azure Kubernetes services, or you enable the add-ons. And there are multiple add-ons. The 2 that I have enabled, one is the monitoring, and other is the Ingrains app gateway. Okay, Ingrains in case of the Kubernetes is needed when you want to connect, when you want to make sure that people are able to reach to your websites. So this is what I've enabled. Now, when you enable the add-on for the Ingrains, you would need the subnet CIDR, you would need the app gateway name. These are the 2 mandatory things, and that's what I have defined in a customized manner here. Docker breach, I have explained it earlier. DNS service IP is needed to DNS, resolve the DNS. The CIDR I have explained earlier. Generate SSH keys, because at some stage I would want to connect to the master nodes. Since it's Linux, I need to connect in case if I need to then. Tags not mandatory. Because we have a policy, hence I've defined the tag, and subnet ID is for the subnet that's going to be used, okay, to create the nodes and a verbose setting. So this is how you create the master plane, okay, the control plane, the master server, and then we create the Windows node. Same method, but instead of using just saying AZ AKS create, we will see AZ AKS node pool add, because you are adding the node pool in the existing cluster. Okay, pretty straightforward, simple. You will say AZ AKS node pool add, provide the cluster name, provide the name of the node pool, resource group, OS type, obviously Windows, because you're deploying XP Single on that. Node VM size, Kubernetes versions, node count, and verbose. Simple, straightforward, nothing fancy. I'll try to add this code next time onwards in a GitHub so that you can download and you can play around with it. And then you make sure that you are connected onto your local environment, using your local environment. So if I have been able to do this way, kubectl get pods, the reason that I am able to do this is because I have the credentials available in my local using the get credentials to access the cluster. Okay, that's in brief how we really create the AKS cluster. The focus was not to show you how to create the cluster, but to talk more from an XP Single architecture and creating the point of view. At some stage in the future, if you ever need and see or want us to talk more about the AKS cluster, we can certainly have a separate session. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go back. So we have covered this part, which is the AKS scripts. Okay. Let me move XP Single architecture review. So we are going to be seeing the the architecture. Now, this one looks like it's very small. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to pull in the PDF, zoom in a bit, and hopefully you should be able to see it. Okay. So this is how the AKS XP single architecture looks like. You have the AKS cluster in the East region already defined. We are going to be running it on one worker node pool. Okay. Let me zoom in a bit more so that you can see it. Okay. We have a CM port defined here. We have application gateway, ingress controller. Remember the add-on that I mentioned about. So the add-on is going to set up the application gateway ingress controller. And I'll come back on this again in a minute to explain you more about it. This is pretty much standard, okay? Core text processing, ID, MS SQL, these are all the part that runs in the backend, Solar, the MS SQL part also, okay? So nothing very technical here. This is all by default that's already available within the Sitecore images. So I've not really made any changes here. In the future, we are going to be talking about how to actually build the images or the Kubernetes, or how do you really customize the images when you want to add on the SXAs and TDS license and a lot of other stuff. Okay. Let's focus on the application gateway ingress controller for a second now, because that's the interesting part and that's what we should all be trying to understand. So when you enable the add-ons, it sets up a pod, this one, okay? The purpose of this pod is to make sure that it keeps an eye on what is really happening in the backend, especially in case of the CM and the CDs, okay? Not just for the XP singles, but when we do the XP scaled also, what it's going to do is that it's going to actually keep a track and keep updating the application gateway, okay? The application gateway, the Azure application gateway, that acts as a firewall or as a gateway or as an entry point. So the purpose of this pod is to keep updating the app gateway on the pods. Gone are the days where you had to go and manually update the application gateways. If you remember, if you come from the time of the platform as a services, you would know that you had to set up the application gateway manually, and then you have to go and create the listeners, the backend pools, the HTTP settings, the health checks, and a lot of other stuff. Now, those all responsibility is now on this person here, which is good. The only limitation is that you can't really go and change the naming conventions, because that's all going to be managed by this guy here. Okay. If I can quickly show you an example. Okay. I'm going to bring back my screen again. Okay. Let's go to the another group. When you set up cluster, when you create this cluster, it's going to set up two resource groups. One is the name that you provide, and the other one that would be called as MC master control resource group and the name of the cluster. And it's going to create all the related resources in a different resource group. As you can see, this application gateway has been created here. Okay. And let's go to the listeners. The only listener that you would see here is for 80, but let's just focus for a second on the naming conventions, right? This is all being automatically managed by the application gateway ingress controller here. Okay. All right, let's move on, because we want to do the demo as well. And let's talk about very quickly on the manifest file. Okay, the manifest file looks like this. So this is for the CM, where you're creating the services now. Then you're creating a deployment. We label them appropriately. We set the replicas. We match the labels. And then you go on to provide some environment variables that is going to be set up separately. And this is where you use the image. Okay. Similarly, I've set up each and every YAML file or manifest file here, including the ingress. And the ingress has the annotations of saying that you should be using the application gateway, okay, the one set up by the cluster using the add-ons. Okay. And then we have defined the rules here. I'm going to be using the CM-Kubernetes, short form of Kubernetes, KTS-dngprojects.com. These are the two URLs that I'm setting it up here. Okay. And it's going to be running on HTTPS. We will use the default MS SQL. This is all going to be the pods. Similarly for the YAML stuff, the Solar, the Xconnect, the automation worker, and the such services. The reason I'm moving a little fast in terms of the going through the manifest file is because I would want to do a separate detailed session on the YAMLs. If you're not very familiarized with how to set up YAML, if you're not really being able to understand I can probably go and talk about it for an hour, right? So that's not going to be ideal. So hopefully in the future, we will have a separate session on how to set up the YAMLs and we'll go step by step. But nonetheless, I still wanted to show you how we set up the YAMLs. And this is a very basic example. I'm going to make sure that I copy it on the GitHub and I'll provide you the link for the GitHub and you can download and you can play around with it. I would want to make some changes and then make sure it is generalized for everyone. Okay. So you touched upon the manifest file. Now is the demo time. Okay. All right. So what we're going to do is that before I show you the demo, before I start setting up the pods, here's what I wanted to show to you. Okay. This is already working. Okay. Now this is, it was, I should not say it's working. It was working. Okay. The URL that I showed it to you already, cm-kts.dngprojects.com. Similarly, now this is, from the CD side. The naming convention don't mind, but this is from an admin point of view. Okay, this is all working fine. However, what I have done is that you will see we do not really have any pods, which means if I refresh, it's going to time out. Okay, let it run in the backend, and when it times out, I will let you know. In the meantime, let me start showing you the demo. Okay, give me a second. Okay. So when you start, is this big enough or you want me to zoom in more? Are we good? Can everybody see this clearly?
Yes.
All right, thank you. So the first thing when you set up is you want to set up the secrets. Okay. So I'm going to upload some secrets. Why secrets? Well, you need everything that you do in terms of the images. The way I've done it rather, I want to upload the username, the password, the SQL Server name, the connection strings, and some of the settings in the secrets. So I'm uploading the secrets. Okay. And if I say kubectl secrets, you will see it's been uploaded. Okay. The second thing, and in order, what I do is set up the ingress controller. Okay. Apply. Now, as you can see, everything is coming from the YAML file, the manifest file that I've shown it to you. Okay. And when we say kubectl get ingress, you will see the Sitecore ingress with this name is created. Then you have the CM host file, and then you have the naming conventions already provided. Okay, just give me a second. Okay. So we have the host file or the settings that I provided in the ingress here. In the ingress here, okay, this one, you will see it here. This one, okay. This is the IP address of the application gateway, and I'm referring that I'll be using the port 80 and port 443, and just the age in terms of the when the ingress was created. Okay. All right, let's move on. Okay. Now I want to set up the SQL. Okay. kubectl describe pods, or let's just do get pods. Take the name of the pod, okay, and just say kubectl describe pods, the name of the pod, and it will tell you that the container is started. How do I reconfirm? kubectl get pods. It says 101 created. So this is our first pod that we have created. So far we uploaded a secret, which is not a pod, is the information that you're giving into the backend. Then you created the ingress controller, okay, just the ingress settings. For the first time, we are creating some pod. And remember, I showed you that this will time out. So as you can see, since we did not have any pods, so it's timing out. And we will start setting up the pods one at a time. So SQL is created. We will now set up Solar. And I will do the same stuff just to make sure that I catch the name of the solar here. kubectl describe, remove this. And you can add the name of the solar. Okay. And it says it has been created successfully. Now for me, it is setting up pretty fast. The reason being is that the images that is needed are already downloaded into the local cluster. If you are doing it for the first time, it's going to take some time to download the images. The image size could vary anywhere from maybe 3-4 gig to 8-9 gig also. Okay. So just be mindful about it. Just to save the time, I had to do it this way, and that's what I've done. I'm going to set up the ID now. Okay. Get pods. Okay, the ID is being set up, the container is being created, which is nice, but the Solar that we set up is all running fine. The SQL that we set up is all running fine. Let's refresh and see if this is taking time. That's completely okay. Let's go and check this. Okay, it says it has started, which means if I go back and do pods, okay, the pod is set up and the container will probably come up. Okay, so when it says 100, which means in a single pod you have single container. Okay, let it continue to work in the backend. That's not a problem for us. It will come up anyway. Let's keep on moving in the interest of the time. We are going to set up the external services now. Okay, get pods. All right, it's working in the backend. It's container being created. Let's just copy this. Okay, it says the pod has been created, which is fine. The container image that being used here is this one. Okay, it's been successfully assigned also to this node. Okay, the ID is working, as you can see. It takes time, but that's okay. Similarly, the XConnect is going to take some time, but it should eventually come up. I'll keep on moving forward. I'll keep on setting up the pods, and this time we are going to be setting up the, not this one. Okay, we're going to be working on the XDB search worker. Okay, it says it's created. Great, kubectl get pods. Okay, it's getting created. Let's just take this one and do kubectl describe pods and the name of the pod. Say it's the pod has been created. Okay, the secrets that's being used. So you will see everything that we have done is now being used here. If we do kubectl get pods, okay, and you can see the XConnect is also working. The search is also working. Keep moving forward. Now is the time to do it for the XDB automation. So copy again and paste it. Okay. And then you have the being created. It will eventually get created in the backend. I will keep moving forward. The another one that we need to create is the Cortex processing worker. Okay. Great. Processing worker is being created. The automation and everything that we create is up and running and fine. And the last one that remains is the big one, which I call as the CM or the CD. Okay. Great. kubectl get pods. I'm expecting everything will be working other than the CM, which is how it's going to be because it's going to take some time to setting it up. Let's just copy the CM name here. Okay. Let's do kubectl describe pods. It should say that it has started. Great. I want to see some of the logs. So I'll say kubectl logs and the name of the CM. Okay, as you can see, it's in the initialization phase. As you know, Sitecore takes a bit of time. In the meantime, what I do is that I go back to the cluster. Okay, I go back to the cluster and you can see the app gateway is being updated. Okay, is being updated, and then earlier we did not have this many listeners here, and now we have the listeners. You go to the backend pool, and then you will see the backend pools here mentioned here. As we know, the backend everything works on the port 80, nothing is on 447. The pods doesn't really work on 447. Let me go back to the backend health, because if I start explaining this, we'll probably run out of the time. So let me go back to the backend health quickly and see what our results are we getting. Is it even able to talk to the backend pods or not? Okay. I see some chat people asking questions. I'll try to answer that. Okay. Okay, you see the ID is reported healthy, the CM is not. Why is that? Because the CM is probably still coming up. Let's follow the logs. Okay, now it is coming up, which is great. Okay, let's move on to our session here, and let's try to refresh this and this one too, and let's see what happens. Okay. All right, there you go. The CM is now working fine. And if I show you the logs here, you will see some exceptions, which is fine. But as you can see, you're getting a 200 OK here for now. Okay, and pretty much the CM has started up and running. Okay, let's move back to the CM, and you can see my admin is also started working now. Okay, I will log in. Obviously, I've saved my session. I'm using the same login. All right, great. We are going to be checking few steps very quickly. Let's look into the experience analytics to make sure that we're not seeing any errors. We don't, which is nice. This if you have been working with the CM, if you're doing it PaaS platform or an infrastructure as a services, virtual machines, you would understand. Experience analytics and experience profile has always been a bigger headache to set it up. No issues. Good so far. Okay, we go to the control plane. We populate the schema, the solar schema. Populate it quickly. Hopefully, it won't take much of a time. And the last thing that I'm going to show to you is to do the indexing, and then I will open up for the questions, or I'll try to answer the questions that you have asked in the chat window. So let me take some questions. I see Surendra has asked a question where he says from where to get this create cluster scripts. These are customized scripts, buddy. Basically, this is the one that I have set it up. So I'm going to be copying it on the GitHub. I'll try to provide the GitHub detail next time, when I do another sessions. I really haven't set up the GitHub for the public access for now, but everything that you saw, including the YAMLs and the clusters and everything, you will see in the GitHub action. So let me move on to the indexing manager, select all, and let's just simply rebuild. All right, and it has started. Okay, go back here, just refresh. Okay, how do I make sure that I'm really ending up on the same, the one where I'm really going to? Okay. That's the remote address, which is 2062.208.255. Let's bring in our application gateway and verify, and then let's also refresh this, make sure this is healthy. We'll come back to here. Let's verify the IP address. That's 2062.208.255. That's the one. Let's go to the backend health, and I'm expecting that it will be healthy here. Yeah. Okay. So everything is good. Indexing done. All done. That's it from a demo point of view. I wanted to end it up on 11:15. My apologies if I have been a little fast because there was a lot, and I know there's a lot to be done and a lot of questions. If you have any demo request or any coaching answer session request for the XP single for now, you can obviously reach to Kushbu and she can help arrange another session. So if you would like to understand a little bit more about specific technology, we would be also happy to have a session on that. But we have a whole series planned for the DevOps, and I will continue to do the demos and the sessions, and I will also bring in different people as part of the process. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I will open up for any questions now.
So, Hardeep, there is two questions from Surendra, I guess, and Surendra. And first is also explain quickly how to create cluster. So, I guess you covered this during your presentation.
Yeah.
And second is, can you quickly explain what we need to set up, uh, what we need to do to set up a Kubernetes from a fresh machine?
Okay, see the Kubernetes that I've shown you is part of the Azure Kubernetes services. We did not set it up on a virtual machine, and I wouldn't encourage you doing it that because when you try to do it on a master control plane, it's very time consuming and there are a lot of moving pieces that you'll have to set up individually. Okay, so I don't recommend doing it on a machine, whether it's going to be your laptop or even a virtual machine. That's not advisable unless you are really good at Kubernetes or you are ready to spend a lot of time into it. Rather, there's a better approach, which is you should go and try to explore and read more about the Azure Kubernetes services because a lot of your headache, you would rather want to focus on the product. Unless your interest is into learning the Kubernetes, is a different story. Then we need to start from the basics and understand a few things about the Kubernetes. What I would rather encourage, if your end goal is to set up the Sitecore platform, the XP single or the XP scaled, then you should explore the Azure Kubernetes services. You can they gave you 1 month of free and some rupees also. So not necessarily you'll have to spend money from your pocket, but you should try to explore that using the portal. Once you are familiarized with the portal, in the meantime, before we do the next session, you will have all the scripts available, and you should be able to then go through it and work with it as well. So see, setting up Kubernetes on a machine, there's Minikube available, there's different options available, but we are all living in a cloud era. So it's more important and it makes sense also to start exploring more on the cloud side, whether you do it on Azure or whether you do it with AWS, which is Elastic Kubernetes Services. But essentially, I would encourage you to do it on the cloud. And if somebody, if we get an audience who really wants to understand the Kubernetes in a little more detailed manner, we can certainly have those sessions so people feel more confident. Hopefully, I have answered your question, Surendra.
There is one more question. Do you know any tool to monitor nodes from our machine rather than Azure portal or command line?
Yeah, Prometheus is one tool that is available that comes in pods. That's an open source. Um, Let me try to provide you a link to that. Give me a second. Okay. But then there are other third-party paid versions too. Mostly what happens is that you get Prometheus. I think I'm pronouncing it correctly. That's the one that you should use. Let me see if I can pull out the link for that quickly. One sec. Prometheus. It's not the Prometheus, it's Prometheus. Okay. It already is supported by the AKS. It's already been deployed in the backend, but I've pasted the link in the chat window. Application Insight is also there. That's provided by Azure. You can use that too. We've got 11 minutes more. Does anyone have any other questions?
There is a request for a session. Like it will be great if you can show how to do deployment on CM nodes in future session.
Absolutely. So as part of the DevOps series, I will bring in my team members. They are going to be talking about in detail. There are going to be sessions that would cover the YAML files from a cloud engineering point of view. Then there's going to be YAML files from the build and release point of view. There's going to be team member coming in from the managed services point of view. People who are going to be telling you how to troubleshoot, how to monitor, what's the best practices, and a lot of other stuff. Uh, that's the reason we have planned this whole in DevOps series where we keep on bringing in the people. So, Khushbu, we have made a note of it, and we'll try to make sure that we talk about this. I think
Yes.
that's probably going to be the third or the fourth one. The reason being is that you would want to understand the architecture first on an XP scale or an XP single, right? What we have done in this case is we have shown the XP single, and then we are going to be talking about the deployment processes. Uh, the the way I look into it is going to be, the rolling updates or blue and green, depending upon, how much time do we have and, who I can pull in and show us the demos. So, but yes, there are all sessions planned. I promise you, by the end of the year, you're all going to be good at least doing the AKS. Okay. Anything else we have, Kushbu?
Yeah, one more question. Can we set up JSS sites as well through this container approach?
Well, to be honest, I haven't looked into it yet. Sitecore came with the container services sometime last year in the month of October, I believe. And since then, everybody has been trying to do their own standardization, and we spent as a team a lot of time in standardizing stuff. That's something is in our pipeline. We are going to be looking into it. There's a lot of other things that we would want to do it. For example, multi-region architecture, some other methods available, Istio, and there are so many other tools available. JSS, I haven't seen yet container services or something coming in from Sitecore. Maybe I haven't spent enough time to look into it. So that's something that I haven't tried it out yet, but we can certainly cover up in some of the future sessions that we will do on JSS. I know it. We have been internally discussing on JSS on a separate discussion level, so it's going to eventually happen, and I'll be more than happy to do it to you.
I think that's it for the question. We don't have any more question here. But as Hardeep mentioned, if you have any questions, you can reach out to Sugin team on Twitter, or you can email to Hardeep as well. He already shared his email ID. So, yeah. Yeah.
All right, then. I appreciate everyone spending some time, and appreciate Surendra asking questions. I always like them, and it's always nice to interact with each other. So hopefully, I'll see you on some of the other sessions that we are planning. So thank you. Have a wonderful day. Yeah, go ahead, Surendra. Looks like he's got one more question.
Yep.
You can enable and ask questions, Surendra. You can enable your voice if it's okay with you instead of typing.
Uh, he will not be able to, but I can allow him to unmute.
Okay. Yeah, maybe,
1 second, Surendra. Uh, yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, hi.
Hello. Yep.
Hey, hi, Hardeep. That's a nice and quick session. So I want to start my journey as on the Kubernetes. So what I have to do?
Well, pick up a book from an Amazon store and start
No,
reading
I don't
about the
want to
Kubernetes.
do that. So that's why I am in this session. I don't want to read the book.
So keep attending the session. I'm sure at some stage you'll become a Kubernetes expert.
No,
See, if you can't see, if you'll have to start reading at some stage, right? And if you do not really want to get into book, that's okay. What you can do is read some of the Microsoft's documentation available on the Kubernetes. Okay, that's generic documentations. There are video sessions already available, a quick hour and 2 hour and 3 hours of a Kubernetes video session available. You should also try to go through it. Should not take more than 3 or 4 days to go through it. We can also have, if that's something that really interests you and you want to start learning it, we can also have session provided. I get the audience, 2, 3, 4 people coming in requesting about the Kubernetes services. We'll be more than happy to have a session with you. But if you can't do that, then there are 2 to 3 ways you can do that. Books, one I recommended. Documentation coming in from the Microsoft, I recommended. And third one is the video sessions available. There are Udemy's and there are so many areas where you can go. If you do not want to do that at all, just get onto Azure, log into Azure. They give you free access for a certain number of rupees on a monthly basis, 10,000. Just start playing around with AKS. Okay. Even if you don't create it, even if you fail, that's completely going to be okay. But just start getting yourself familiarized with what it is before you start actually getting into the Kubernetes of it. So that's what my recommendation will be.
So when I say starting thing on the Kubernetes, I'm saying it's from the Sitecore point of view. Let's suppose I have to set up Sitecore on the Kubernetes. So from where I can start it?
Mostly we are going to be doing it on the, as Sitecore community, I'm saying. Either we are going to be doing it on Azure or on AWS. I think there's going to be a very, very less probability where a client would come and say that, okay, I've got virtual machines. I wanted to deploy the Kubernetes first, and then I want to deploy the Sitecore on top of it. I don't think so. That's really going to happen. People and client would want to do it on utilize the Kubernetes on clouds. So my suggestion is start learning the AKS, start spending some time, ask your organization, can I have an Azure account? It's free, 10,000 rupees monthly basis is free, and you can learn as much as you want to. It's good enough. That's how we started many years ago when we started working on the Azure and the AWS, right? So you set up your own account, play around with the AKS, and that will be your stepping stone. And then from
So
an Sitecore point of view, Sitecore provides the documentations. Obviously, you'll benefit from the sessions that we are doing here. We'll share the documentation that, I promised it already. It just needs some time. But I'll share the YAML files and everything. We are going to be having the sessions on how to even write the YAML files or edit the YAML files from the document from the Sitecore's point of view. So if you keep on attending the sessions, I'm sure you will keep on learning. And if you need, you and I and some of us can get on a separate call, and we can probably guide you too.
that will be very nice. So can I start it from the Sitecore provided the container packages? I can download it, then I can
Absolutely.
play around on
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
Azure.
Start doing it on your local machine first.
Mhm.
Set up Docker on your VM, on your laptop, on your desktop. That's the first step.
All right, let me take this as a first step, and yeah, we'll look forward for your next session, maybe next week on every Saturday.
Yeah, that's the plan. And I strongly believe in sharing the knowledge. If I've been doing something for the past 20 years, not microservices, but in general, I think if I can just let the community know or share the knowledge, that would be fantastic. That's the whole idea. I'm not really going to be making greater benefits from the sessions, but that's the idea.
Yeah,
And I
you will get more audience if you also put these sessions on YouTube, so that people who are on the different time zone, they will get benefited from this.
Well, that's up to Kushbu.
Yes.
He's the moderator here.
Yes, Surendra.
So
So
yeah,
we record these sessions and we upload this to Sugin channel. So it will be available to people shortly.
yeah, that will be great.
All right.
Thanks
So
to
if
you. Thanks, Hardik.
yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. Hope you learned something new today. That was
Yeah,
the intention.
yep.
Thank you everyone for your time. I really appreciate, and we'll come back soon with some new sessions. Okay.
Thank you, Hardip, for the session, and thank you all for joining.
Thank you, Kushbu, for organizing it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you.